Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition. Welcome to another episode of My Body, My Bump, My Baby. Today our episode is Ask the Midwife. I'm your host, B, and today we have the pleasure of diving into the world of pregnancy, labor, and immediate postpartum, and maybe all things in between with our seasoned midwife, Amy. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, our mamas are so excited to hear from you. So for the listeners, we have spent the last 2 weeks gathering questions from all of our mamas here at Enzo, and they have come up with a really great list of questions for Amy, and we are going to just kind of chip right through those. But before we get started, Amy, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am a certified nurse midwife, and I'm originally from the Midwest. I'm from Iowa, and I was a registered nurse for a really long time before I went back to midwifery school, and I did most of my nursing career in obstetrics. I dabbled in a couple of other areas too. But during my tenure in labor and delivery, I really saw an opportunity to provide direct patient care in a different way, and I decided to go back and get a postmaster's degree in midwifery. And so while I was living in Chicago, I went to the University of Illinois Chicago and got my postmaster's, and really loved the program there and was able to get a job at an amazing hospital out there at Rush Copley in Aurora. So that's where I started my midwifery career. And then my family decided to move back to Colorado. And so when I came back here, I was fortunate enough to be able to practice both in a home birth setting and then in a birth center local in Colorado Springs, and now I work in a hospital setting in Castle Rock. So a certified nurse midwife is a registered nurse who has a master's degree, a lot of extra preparation for advanced practice nursing. So we're all advanced practice nurses and have licensure to provide full scope midwifery care in our state.
That is awesome. And so I don't know if the listeners caught that, but a certified nurse midwife it sounds like can practice in the hospital, can practice at birth center, and also can practice in a home birth setting. And you've had the opportunity to do all three.
Correct, yes. So I've tried it all, and I love births. So I love working in every single environment that I've been in. And yes, it is a little bit different. So most certified nurse midwives in the United States do work in hospital-based settings, but many of them also provide what we call community birth, meaning at home or in a birth center.
I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so y'all, you got to know a little bit about Miss Amy and her credentials. She's very experienced and she's amazing at what she does. So we're going to dive in to some of the questions that our mamas have given us. Amy, the first question I have is, are there ways to prep for early postpartum while you're in pregnancy?
Yeah, so we could go a lot of different directions with this question. But I think, in general, prepping for postpartum does begin during, before your pregnancy, ideally, right? Planning for pregnancy, but having a healthy pregnancy, having good nutrition, exercising regularly, and setting up your support team for what you want your postpartum to look like can be really, really helpful. I know some of the specifics of the question were also looking at like things like diastasis or pelvic floor. And I think, it's really beneficial for people to see a physical therapist during pregnancy. And if that's not something that a client or patient wants to do, I refer all my clients postpartum to pelvic floor physical therapists. I really do feel like that is a missing element in maternity care in the United States. And not everybody chooses to do that. But, one of the things that midwives do is we take care of women for a lifetime, right? It's not just pregnancy and birth, but throughout the rest of their care and through menopausal years. And what we see is that when we haven't tended to our bodies, the pelvic floor, repairing diastasis, that later in our lives, we tend to have a lot of problems with holding up our bladder, especially, and with things like pelvic floor pain, and other problems like prolapse that we can kind of get away with a little bit when we are younger. Not everybody can. Some people do have immediate problems postpartum that need to be dealt with. And those are the clients that are more likely to tend to it right away. But many of us feel really well after birth and don't feel like we need to do certain things. And I find it really beneficial.
So sometimes what you're saying is sometimes you might feel pretty good afterwards, but they're down the road as you get older, if there was any kind of, I don't want to use the word damage, but alterations, I guess, in the body due to pregnancy or labor, that maybe it would start to show up in other ways as you get older if you didn't take care of it after pregnancy or after birth?
Yes, absolutely. I think probably one of the most common ones that we sometimes have normalized would be leaking urine from the bladder, right? That is normal for women to have,
right.
Either after they have a baby or just later in their life because they've had babies.
Yeah.
And it is actually not normal, and it can be improved with pelvic floor physical therapy and general self-care, right? Like exercise and other things. But tending to that area of our body after we have a baby is a great opportunity. It's a great time to do the work so we don't have to do it later.
Is there any benefits to, say, for example, you have baby number one and then you tend to these details post baby number one? Are there benefits in doing that for preparation for baby number two, either how you carry the baby in pregnancy or how you labor with the baby, baby number two?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when we are pregnant, obviously, right, we are putting on extra weight. Our center of gravity shifts. Our bones and our pelvis are moving. So many physiologic changes are happening, all which affect the pelvic floor. And if we've done the work the first time, often people can go back to and re-tap into those same exercises and things and implement them in another pregnancy. But yeah, continuing to do the work is going to be really beneficial, especially for something like diastasis. If you've had one once, and you get pregnant again, you are going to be way more prone for that to open right back up. And there are a lot of things you can do simply with breath work, but also just with regular exercises to appropriately engage the core and engage the pelvic floor during your pregnancy and during exercises that you're doing during pregnancy and postpartum.
So is there a point where it's too late to do some of this work?
No, there really isn't. I mean, I've referred people, that are in their 50s to 70s to go do pelvic floor physical therapy because they are having a problem that I think that could be resolved in that way versus, say, having a major surgery done.
Yes.
Which sometimes is offered as one of the first approaches is like, we'll just do a bladder sling. We can correct this. We'll do a hernia repair. And often if we take the physical therapy aspect as the first step, we can prevent needing to do those major interventions.
It's super interesting because I remember at least 10 years ago, and maybe it was a little bit longer, pelvic floor PT actually was not that well known, and it was actually really hard to find practitioners. And I felt like the doctors would usually recommend only surgical options and really didn't have any non-surgical options that they were aware of. Do you think it's shifted a little bit? I mean, obviously here in the Springs, pelvic floor PT is a little bit more accessible than it was 10, 13 years ago. Do you think that the recommendations have shifted with that or not so much?
I really think it depends on the care provider that you see.
Mm-hmm.
There's a wide variance. I do think that I've seen the availability of practitioners that provide women's health physical therapy really open up. I commonly in my career can think of, like, I could probably name the people who I referred to because they were so few and far between. And I feel like we do have a much larger group to work with to refer women to, both that take insurance or do in-home therapy, which is really great to have a lot of different options available.
And then these things can get started, at least preventative measures for diastasis can happen in pregnancy. And then pelvic floor PT relationship can start in pregnancy as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. You do not need to wait to have a baby to work on these things at all. In fact, we definitely obviously encourage women to exercise regularly during pregnancy, but we don't always give them guided therapies for how do you prevent a diastasis or how do you work on your pelvic floor. And there are some really great programs out there. BirthFit would be a great example of a program that focuses on strength training, but also how to engage your pelvic floor in pregnancy and how to use breath work to prevent diastasis and those kinds of things. So working on it, early on would definitely be ideal.
I love that. You ready to go on to the next question?
Yes.
All right. So this is from a mama who is pregnant currently, and she wants to know, how do I stop waking up dripping in sweat?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Great question. When we are pregnant, our blood volume increases significantly, and that heats up our body along with all of the hormones that are surging through us. And so to be overheated is pretty common. I think the simple things that you can do are obviously change what you're wearing to bed, right? If you're normally wearing flannel pajamas and now you're pregnant, you're going to want to change over to cotton, wear less clothing items, sometimes no clothing items.
Right.
Use fans, to circulate air in the room. Use air conditioning when it's really hot. And change your sheets to more cotton-based sheets, those kind of things. And then working with your partner to let them know they're going to have to change what they're doing too, because they're going to be freezing when you change all this up. Also, taking if you're taking baths or showers before you go to bed, just cooling off a little bit, but before you jump into bed can be helpful as well. Yeah, I think just generally knowing that it is normal to have sweating during pregnancy, not just at night, but often people do complain of that one.
Is it ever a problem? Or an indication of a problem?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say in general, most pregnant women do have some times where they're overheated. There can be certain things like thyroid disorders might be a good example where somebody might be excessively overheated, and if that's something that somebody's concerned about, I would definitely recommend that they talk with their healthcare provider about what's going on so they can have an appropriate workup for that.
Yeah, great. Here's another one. What can a pregnant person do to combat restless leg syndrome?
Great question. So restless leg syndrome is pretty common, and we see it a lot in pregnancy. One of the first things I would want to probably address is checking the person's iron and ferritin levels, because that can be a common medical issue that is missed with people that have restless legs. So it can be related to anemia, and anemia is more common in pregnancy, especially in the third trimester. But even people that have normal hemoglobin and hematocrit could have a problem with their ferritin. They could have low ferritin, and that can really contribute. So I would suggest asking your provider to check those if they haven't been. Most people are going to have CBCs during pregnancy where your hemoglobin and hematocrit are checked. But if restless legs are coming up, all of a sudden, and you haven't had those labs done in a while, that might be worth checking out. Doing regular exercise is very helpful for restless leg syndrome. And supplementing with magnesium, if you're not getting enough through your diet, can also be a great help.
Do you have a particular supplement that you like to recommend?
I usually use for this particular ailment magnesium glycinate.
Okay.
Particularly works a little bit better than some of the other ones.
That's good to know. There's so many different types of magnesium you can get your hands on, and it would be sad to get the wrong one.
Yep.
Is that one of the ones that also kind of gets the stool moving?
So it actually doesn't. That would be magnesium citrate.
Okay, good.
And the good news is you can use both. So if you're having constipation and restless legs, you can use citrate and glycinate.
Without a problem.
Correct, yes. I mean, with some magnesium, people will have stomach cramping and or potentially diarrhea. And so often with things like citrate, you need to titrate up the dose, or you might need to back it down a little bit if you're having some side effects. But typically, these are safe supplements, and they really do help with some of the discomforts of pregnancy.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. How about if you're pregnant and you are just experiencing crazy itching all over your body?
Yeah, so skin changes in pregnancy are very common. A few different things are going on. Physiologically, your skin is really stretching. So a lot of people are complaining of itching on their belly, and some people do have itching all over.
Or maybe even breasts as well, right? Yep, belly and breast. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the breast growth and the growth of the belly, the skin is really stretching. Using a good emollient, and I really like, something with a single ingredient, like plain shea butter is great. Well, a lot of the commercial products, we find when we're pregnant, our skin becomes just more sensitive.
Yes.
And you actually have more reaction when you try to put things on. And we haven't really found that there's particularly scientifically proven ointments or creams that manage this particular issue when it's a non-medical issue. So, but keeping your skin moist, and then I think one of the biggest things that isn't always simple but is so important is making sure you're drinking enough water.
Yes.
You have to really hydrate well when you are pregnant, and for a lot of people, if they are not big water drinkers, they have a challenge with this, and I always generally recommend at least half your body weight in ounces of water per day when you are pregnant. And then you need to add water if you're being overheated, if you're exercising and sweating a lot, those kind of things, and are all going to really help with the skin. And then there are some soaps and things sometimes that I recommend. For example, pine tar soap is a great soap that's been around forever, but that works kind of to help with itchy skin. Sometimes you have to change out your soaps and detergents if you're using things with lots of perfume, simply because your skin has become more sensitive during the pregnancy. And then definitely chatting with your healthcare provider if you're having problems with itchy skin, because there are certain conditions. Cholestasis of pregnancy would be one that comes to mind. Typically, with that, you have extreme itching on the palms of your hands and soles of your feet. But sometimes people just have generalized itching along with that as well. So it is something you would want to bring up and make sure that you have appropriate workup if that's necessary.
That's really good to know, because I think a lot of, especially like first time mamas, they don't want to be that person who is, going to the doctor for every little thing. And so I feel like sometimes some things, well, it's just itching. I won't mention it, or I won't fuss about it, but it doesn't hurt to mention it just in casers, right? And like you said, it probably just isn't anything more than skin stretching or dryness or sensitivity, but it's good to know that that's something worth mentioning. I wanted to double back real quick. The soap that you recommended, is it like pine tar, like PINE and then TAR? Is it a type of soap or a brand of soap?
It is a type of soap.
Type of soap, okay.
Yes. And it's probably not one you would pick up off the shelf. It has a particular smell to it.
Oh, does it?
Yep. But now I'm noting, actually, I kind of chuckled the other day. My partner bought some new soap for himself, and it's one of the new brands for men, and it's pine tar soap. And I had to I was chuckling about it because I was like, great, now there's another thing I can recommend to people. But you can find it really any store that sells a variety of soaps, like Walmart carries it.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it's been around forever, and it comes in bars or in liquid soap. But it does help with the itching of the skin.
Okay.
Another thing that can be helpful too is just the hormones of pregnancy sometimes can affect our skin and cause some itchiness. And one of the ways that we can just help support our hormones is by supporting our liver. So using things like dandelion root tea might be really helpful to drink during pregnancy if you're having a lot of itching.
Oh, that is very interesting. I like that. And that's something that's super easily accessible.
Yes, and it's safe.
And it's safe. Good to know. Awesome. So we have a mama who said that she read somewhere that she should be collecting colostrum like towards the end of third trimester. And that just kind of started a real big conversation for us in the class about what are the pros, what are the cons, do you have to do it, or is it a nice to do, those type of things. And I think along that conversation, there was a little bit of like, what if I can't get any, those type of thoughts coming up.
Yeah, I love this question. I do absolutely recommend that my clients collect colostrum at the end of pregnancy. And no, it's not required. I kind of consider it a very safe sort of insurance policy for yourself. And there's a couple different reasons to do it. So generally we would recommend not starting until after 37 weeks. So if there is concern that somebody has about could that put me into labor or cause any problems? I wish it were that easy. But in general, no, it isn't going to do that. But if somebody has preterm labor risk and is pumping and expressing milk at 34 weeks, potentially that could cause some contractions and cause a problem. So we want the person to be term in their pregnancy. And initially, especially with your first baby, you may not get much colostrum out at all. And that can feel a little bit discouraging. So it's good to tell people, you really, it may take some time to actually see colostrum start to flow. Some of us start producing colostrum very early in pregnancy. Some people never see any until after the baby shows up. So we're all very different that way. But what it can be really helpful for is if you've got some colostrum if you're having a community birth at home or a birth center and we're having a problem with breastfeeding, or there's a concern about baby's blood sugar, or there's a latch issue that develops, we just don't always know how it's going to go. While we consider breastfeeding to be normal and natural, sometimes there are bumps in the road, and having some of your own breast milk can really be an amazing tool to have in the toolbox. I actually have a great story about this.
Oh, I want to hear it.
I had a client who was having a hospital birth, and she was gestational diabetic. And so one of the things she was really worried about was needing to do interventions like baby being admitted to the NICU or needing to have, either artificial forms of breast milk, formula, that kind of thing, or having that pushed on her in the hospital because she really felt strongly about breastfeeding. So I taught her how to do self-expression, and there is a really great video if anybody needs it. If you just look up Stanford Medicine hand expression is what it's called. They have a great online video that really shows you how to do hand expression of breast milk. So she worked on this project from like 37 to 40 weeks, and she ended up having an induction due to her diabetes and had a lovely birth. Well, when she came into the hospital, she had a gallon-size Ziploc bag full of syringes of colostrum.
Go, mama.
And it was like the talk of the town. Like, nobody could believe she had all this colostrum with her. And we had quite the time trying to label it because we were in the hospital. We had to store this and label it appropriately. But we, got the baby on the breast and used some of that breast milk to bathe the baby. And she decided baby actually had pretty good blood sugars, but she just used it in addition to breastfeeding. She felt more comfortable. She did not want to have to do other interventions. And so she would breastfeed the baby and then give the baby a syringe full of colostrum. And this baby had beautiful sugars the whole time, never needed donor breast milk, never needed formula. And it was just so wonderful. It was like such a rewarding thing for her, like knowing she had done a lot of work to get this, but it really paid off for her. And I see that happen over and over when people have the colostrum. And then you have that self-confidence that you've got milk, right?
Yes.
And you know how to do hand expression before you've even had the baby because it's so helpful to boost your milk production with hand expression. I definitely recommend it. You can always talk with your provider further about it. We recommend waiting until your term, but it's just a wonderful thing to have. And I think in community birth, I've definitely seen it happen where we've prevented transfers to the hospital for the newborn by having that milk available in a baby that maybe needs a little bit of help. And I mean, that's amazing, right?
I love that. And I love that, you're calling it an nice little insurance policy for when it's needed, especially because, this is kind of veering off topic just a tad, but we're learning so much about the development of the immune system and the human microbiome and how so much of the human microbiome is started or initiated through like birth and breastfeeding and all of these type of things. And so, if you can have this wonderful little insurance policy there, I think, it's super, super helpful for a lot of reasons, avoiding transfers, but also just, how wonderful, like you said, for her to know that she was able to provide her baby what they needed, instead of having to rely on any kind of artificial things. Now, here's a question that came up. When you are, end of pregnancy, 37, 38 weeks, and you're trying to hand express colostrum, is it possible that you're going to like run out of colostrum and then the baby comes and there isn't any colostrum left over for them?
Yeah, great question. No, absolutely not. So I always just sort of say like doing it ahead of time just sort of primes the lines, right? But breastfeeding is a supply and demand scenario. And so doing hand expression early on is going to help bring some of that more colostrum in and bring your milk in a little bit quicker. But it isn't going to run out. Not at all.
And you are recommending hand expression over pumping?
I do. I find that it is easier to get the colostrum out, and the evidence shows us this too, with hand expression versus using a pump. Often, even in early breastfeeding, we see, we put a pump on someone if there is separation or a reason medically to do so, and they have a really hard time getting colostrum out through a pump. And it has to do with the viscosity and certainly just with separation and things like that. But hand expression is much more effective for removing colostrum from the breast.
Awesome. So the next question is, are there food or things that a pregnant person can focus on during pregnancy in order to prepare for labor and a good recovery of labor?
Yeah, another great question. So our nutrition in pregnancy is not attended to nearly as well as it should be. It's probably one of the most important things that we can focus on as far as taking good care of ourselves. And in general, the advice I give to people is to eat real food, right,
yes,
during pregnancy, and high protein diet, which can be challenging for some people, especially maybe if you are vegan or vegetarian, but there are definitely ways that you can do this. But it is so important to get micronutrients from our food, right? If you're eating meat, to eat good quality organic meats, to eat fresh vegetables, right? Go to the farmer's market, pick up foods that haven't been contaminated with pesticides and things like that. And with, eating fruits are really wonderful too, but preferably more low glycemic, like berries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and pairing carbohydrates with protein so we don't have big blood sugar spikes during pregnancy is really helpful. Sort of one of the misnomers from Lily Nichols. She wrote a really great book called Real Food for Pregnancy. She also has one called Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. Both wonderful resources. Is to eat no naked carbs, right? So if you're eating an apple, have some peanut butter with it. That's going to really help in aiding your digestion and not having trouble with your blood sugar in pregnancy. But I think the biggest thing is really just focusing on eating real food, right? Shopping the periphery in the grocery store, doing meal planning can be really, really helpful. We often crave simple carbohydrates in early pregnancy and as a quick source of energy. And while it's okay to have some of those things, they don't sustain us, right? So we need high-quality fats and high-quality proteins to build a healthy baby. And those things also, in regards to labor prep, I guess I think more about, just being healthy when you deliver the baby, but also like protein helps us with our tissue integrity. So when we're talking about things like tearing and things like that, people that have good nutrition are less likely to have those types of issues. And your recovery is going to be much better if you have good nutrition to start. And at the end of pregnancy, it can be really great to be doing some meal prepping for your recovery because you aren't going to be feeling like doing that during your recovery.
Yes.
So as you're making, healthy meals, make some of those double batches that you can freeze. And I love the idea. I wish we would do more of this. If you're having a baby shower, to put in those elements of the blessing way, like what are we doing for the mother? Like a friend of mine recently instead of having a baby shower, she just had a cooking party, and I just thought it was brilliant. So everybody came over and helped make meals for her and filled her freezer full of food. And I thought, what a wonderful gift that's actually going to be it's going to change her recovery.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
So those are great ways to kind of think about how food can help you out.
So you mentioned high protein. Do you have a recommendation for like how much protein should a pregnant person be getting in a day? On average. I mean, obviously you're not going to do every day is not going to be the same, but.
Yeah, so there are some weight-based calculations that you can look at. Actually, if you want to calculate it, Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine has a protein calculator for pregnancy, and I'm sure I can provide you this link to link up that does it by weight. But as sort of a general rule of thumb, in the first half of pregnancy, I recommend 80 grams of protein, and in the second half, at least 100. More like 120 for people who might have risk factors for things like preeclampsia. Because we know that increasing protein in the diet can be very, very helpful in preventing or delaying the onset.
Does it change for multiples?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you're going to be more on those higher ends of protein intake for sure.
Mm-hmm. One book I wanted to recommend to the listeners that I think would be in the realm of purchase this during pregnancy, and if you were going to do this really fun cooking party, looking into cooking foods that are appropriate for a healing mama, so somebody who has just given birth. There's a great book called The First 40 Days, The Essential Art of Nourishing the New Mother, and it is, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher her name. Hang Ao. Easy to get on Amazon. There is a Kindle version and a hardcover version. The hardcover version, I just have to say, is beautiful. The imagery in this book is beautiful. But the wonderful thing that she does in here, she highlights how to heal. So you're not going to want to eat the same. You should not eat the same foods that you would normally eat when you're trying to heal, right? So maybe there was some decent blood loss. Well, you want to nourish your body to help recover with that. We had the loss of the heat of the baby, right? And so there's other things foods you can do to bring heat back. And she also includes like herbal tea recipes, all kinds of sweet yumminess in there for that as well.
Yes, I also love this book. And when I had my own kids, it was not available, but I have gifted it to people during pregnancy for the very reasons that you mentioned. And it's also great for friends and family to read this book if they are looking for ways to help you out, because she has so many amazing recipes for, fresh foods and soups and stews and different things that people could help you make. And gifting those to somebody who just had a baby is a wonderful thing.
I love that. And I also love giving the mama some attention on these parties. So that's also really nice. I want to throw in when we're talking about pregnancy and things that we can do to prepare for labor, some non-food related items. I love prenatal yoga. I think moving your body and keeping your body moving during pregnancy is very important. And if you find a good prenatal yoga class, ideally they have woven in some movement, stretches, and postures that lend it so that your body can stay strong where it needs to be strong and loose and limber when it needs to be loose and limber for labor. Which I think is a very big deal. And then one more thing I want to throw out there, childbirth prep classes. If this is your first go at labor, jump into some independent childbirth prep classes. There's a lot of really knowledgeable teachers out there that hopefully are not only talking you through the process, but teaching you and your partner how to be a team, how to move together, and what to expect, and giving you tools and techniques that you could utilize in labor when that comes.
Yes, absolutely. I second both of those things for sure. Those are amazing ways. And I also think, just we could probably talk about this topic all day, but
seriously,
choosing your provider and where you're going to give birth, right? And knowing that you have the option during pregnancy to change that if philosophically what you are wanting is not lining up with how your provider practices or the place where you are going to give birth provides care. So those are great things to think about as well.
That is huge. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I think sometimes we have a care provider that we, for whatever reason, start off with in early pregnancy. And then as we start to get educated and learn more about what we're expecting from our labor experience, what we're wanting, that sometimes our eyes start to open up and we start to realize, oh shoot, maybe this provider and my expectations and goals are not in alignment. And I think it's so, so, so important for everybody to know that if you do come to that place, it is okay to interview other birthing locations and find that right fit, because ultimately, from my experience attending labors, this is going to be a big deal on how your labor unfolds and possibly how you feel about the experience later. So I'm so glad you brought that up. That's such a big deal.
Yes, absolutely. And I remind women too, I mean, even, when I have women come to my practice, currently I'm in a hospital-based practice, and they're talking to me, and it is just so very obvious that they want a community birth.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to open up that door for them, right? Like,
right.
Do you know about community birth? Do you know where you can get one? And that's okay, right? These women have hired us to take care of them during their pregnancy, and it is okay to make a change if you need to.
It is. And I will take that one step further. In this particular case, when we're talking about labor and birth and, recovering in postpartum, it's okay to be selfish and put yourself forward first as well. It's important to have good conversations with your partner and sometimes mom and mom-in-laws, because everybody has an opinion because they all are very excited about this little nugget that we're growing. But in the end, the only person that walks the labor who does the birth is going to be you. And so in that case, have the conversations, but also, give yourself permission to do what feels good for you and your baby.
Absolutely.
Okay. This is a really good question. It's super important. And you know what it just reminded me right now? Okay, I'll tell the question and then I'll tell you what it reminded me. But the concern is, I don't want to tear while I'm pushing this baby out. How do I prevent it? And I can't believe that none of our questions in this list had to do with concerns about pooping while you're pushing. That's okay. The tearing, I know that's a big thing that comes to mind. There's all kinds of stuff you can find online. What would you recommend?
Yeah, this is, I love this question, and it's a legitimate fear
Heck yeah.
that birthing people have, and so it's a great one to address. I think first I would just like to say that our body is made to accommodate a baby, and having severe tears during childbirth is rare. But there are really some very simple things that we can do to help prevent certainly severe tears, but even minor tears too. We've already kind of talked about nutrition, right? Having good nutrition helps us have good skin integrity. But during pregnancy, again, regular physical activity can be really helpful. Things like yoga, really very helpful. But I think a lot of it comes down to the actual labor and birth, especially as we get closer when baby is crowning and delivering. And I think the simplest intervention that we can do is to allow the mom to push instinctively in whatever position she chooses.
Yes.
And I find that when that happens, it's just so incredibly rare to have much tearing and certainly not severe tearing. And if we let her choose, that might mean that she squats, she stands, she gets on her hands and knees, she turns on her side, she's upright. There really isn't a wrong answer, with the exception of one, in my opinion, which would be any sort of forced position, and certainly forced lithotomy, which means laying flat on your back with your legs either like being held back by you or other people or up in stirrups. We're seeing a lot less stirrup use, I think, in hospital environments, but still, people are being put onto their back and lifting their legs or having somebody hold their legs and laying flat on their backs. And, you know, mechanically, this doesn't make any sense to do during the birth for any sort of prolonged period of time, and is definitely going to cause more tearing. Sometimes people, I think, believe, too, if they have an epidural, that they don't have a choice to get into a different position other than lithotomy. And just know that you absolutely do. Simply turning onto your side can change that whole dynamic. It allows your sacrum to open up. It allows the space for the baby to come down and rotate in the way that they need to. And it's amazing. I see so often first-time mamas who have epidurals, if we simply turn them on their side, they don't have any tearing at all. And hands and knees is an option with an epidural, too, if it's not too dense. I do that very, very often. And a lot of people are like, really? I had no idea that I could get up on my hands and knees. And when we get an epidural, our goal, usually for the mama, if she wants one, is to alleviate her pain, but it's not to provide such a heavy motor blockade that she can't move her body at all.
Right.
And so just know that those are definitely options. But I really think it's important to do instinctual pushing. And then all other things that, you know, I just know that I do is certainly offer to do warm compresses. I use essential oils like ginger, geranium on the perineum during pushing. Changing positions frequently during pushing if it's taking some time, and can be really helpful just with rotation and descent of the baby. So preventing, you know, if we can prevent really long pushing in a bad position, that would be great. And then, you know, not being overly aggressive with touch myself. While you're going to get different opinions, I think, from different providers of really providing a lot of hands-on support versus hands-off support. And I don't think there's necessarily a 100% right or wrong answer. But certainly we know, you know, aggressive pressing, rubbing of the perineum can actually cause tearing and is usually not necessary for labor and birth. And then, you know, I already mentioned, warm compresses, using water, and helping to guide people to breathe the baby out when baby is crowning and coming through. So sometimes that might be helping somebody to actually slow down a little bit, allow more stretching to occur. And that requires some patience and practice with the provider, right, to use some of that breath work. And all of that helps quite a bit.
Yeah. When you are talking about instinctive pushing, I want to clarify for the listeners. So it's instinctive versus coached?
Correct. Yes. So, you know, for people who, especially I think for women that don't have epidurals on board, if we sort of just allow them to do what they want to do, they will instinctually go where they think they need to be. It's really an amazing thing to watch. And you see people do different things. I mean, it's kind of how you know it's instinctual, right? Is that people will be swaying and rocking their hips, and then they'll get on all fours. Many women want to be upright during labor and birth, but also in pushing, sometimes you'll see people. The other day I had a mama who just was like, I need to be on the floor. And so I was like, okay, get on the floor. And she got down on the floor, and I just put some blankets under her knees so she would be more comfortable. And, she was sort of semi-squatting, but also on all fours. And the nurse asked her a couple times if she wanted to get back up on the bed. And she was like, no, I'm staying on the floor. And I was just sat down there on the floor with her, and we had a baby on the floor. And it was lovely.
I love it.
And it was a really easy private birth. And I do believe that happens a lot more often when we just allow women to do what they need to do and support them in doing it, right? How do we make them more comfortable, but not make them change what they're doing? There's a reason that they're doing it.
Right. I love that. And I think part of the way to achieve that is, this is to the mamas, hold on to some of that locus of control. How can you tap into your instincts if you keep asking externally, what do I do next? What do I do next? And then also maybe for the provider, give a pause and give her a moment to answer her own question, right? There was another midwife that we had on the podcast who she says, when they ask me, what do I do next? She usually will just wait. And she said, instinctively, they will figure out what is the right thing to do next. And ultimately, they're going to know better because they're experiencing it than somebody external to them, unless they're lost. But if they're like connected with the process and connecting with themselves, they usually will go to that spot that they need to be in. And I love that. And you work in a hospital. In your practice, clearly they're doing that, but generally what I'm hearing is they're not really doing that in the hospitals.
Yes. I mean, I think it's very common still to see lithotomy in the hospital, but I believe strongly you can advocate for yourself in this department. And if you're in a situation where you feel like, okay, my provider's maybe not going to get down on the floor with me, or they're not going to support me to be sitting on a birth stool, something, talk to them about it ahead of time. This is a great conversation to have toward the end of your pregnancy. And I don't really appreciate the term, what will you allow me to do?
Right.
I would reframe, like, I would like to deliver in a position other than being flat on my back in lithotomy. Can I be on my side? Would it be okay if I'm up on my hands and knees? And just open up that door ahead of time, because that, I think, just helps improve communication with your provider and knowing what you want ahead of time, not necessarily in the moment. There's so much research, evidence on not delivering on your back, and you can provide that to them. And maybe if they're not comfortable sitting on the floor like some of the midwives will do, they'd be willing to even just say, you have an epidural, let's just turn you all the way onto your side, and we can help support your legs and we'll get the baby out that way. It can be a really great negotiation if you feel like you're in that position where you need to negotiate.
It's one of those balancing acts, I feel like, because on one hand, you don't want to put your provider in a place where they are out of their element or they're feeling uncomfortable. They need to feel comfortable so that they can keep you safe. But on the other hand, you need to be able to move around and do the things that you feel like you need to do. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were saying with the last question, which is, pick your team wisely. If you're finding that your provider is uncomfortable with some of these things that are important to you, then that's probably not your person. Maybe, go out and start searching a little bit. And by the way, you don't have to, if you're going to go and initiate a search for another provider, you don't have to let the current provider know right away. Go, just talk, get some information, talk to some other people, and then make your choice. It's always okay to chat with other people and just see if you're in better alignment.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, We still have a decent list of questions, but we are running out of time. I want to get in one more question, and then maybe we just have to do this again. It's super fun for me. If you ever have the time, I'd love to have you over and do it again. But let's get this last question in. And mainly because I feel like this is one of those that comes up often enough. It's a concern for a lot of women. And the concern is hemorrhage. What causes it? How can I prevent it? Or is there anything I can do to help prevent hemorrhage?
Yes, this is a super important question, right? Hemorrhages do happen. They happen in every setting, and they happen to low-risk moms. They happen to high-risk moms. There are a lot of different reasons that birthing people can have a postpartum hemorrhage. So some of the common ones would be really short labor, so under 3 hours from start to finish. Really long labor or really long second stage, so the pushing stage of labor. If that's really long, that increases your risk.
What would you define as really long labor? Because I think there's like a lot of different ideas about what that might be.
Yeah. So if your labor is maybe more than 24 hours or your active labor is maybe longer than 12 hours, and again, pushing greater than 3 hours, those things are going to increase your risk. Or if you've had maybe you've had a really long latent labor, that early phase of labor has been many days, and then you finally get into active labor, and maybe that part isn't as long, but your uterus has been contracting for a matter of days. That can make a difference. Induction of labor, huge risk for hemorrhage that is often not talked about as a risk factor. And it absolutely should be. Cesarean birth, right? Increased risk of bleeding and hemorrhage. And sometimes we need to do inductions or cesareans, but we still need to know that there's increased risk of hemorrhage in
and
those
sometimes
scenarios.
We don't need to do them, but we are doing them.
Correct.
And in that case, we definitely would want to know, like, okay,
we're having an elective induction of labor, and the benefit, is I don't want to be pregnant anymore. We need to get the baby out, and the provider wants to schedule it, right? But one of the risks is definitely to have a postpartum hemorrhage. And, to me, true informed consent absolutely has to involve not just the benefits, but the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, what happens if we do nothing in the scenario,
right.
And then giving the client patient the right to choose, right, what they would like to do,
right.
And time to ask questions and things. Sometimes there are medical conditions that can increase risk of hemorrhage, like high blood pressure, preeclampsia. Those things might increase your risk. Having an infection during labor. There are actually a lot of different things, but the main ones would be the ones that we have talked about. So what causes them, sometimes we're causing them by the interventions that we're doing during labor or by initiating a labor. How do we prevent them? Definitely, we can prevent them by trying not to cause them, right? Not trying to do things like elective inductions, unnecessary cesareans, and supporting people during labor and birth. If somebody is having a long labor, that might be a time where we do some interventions to help promote labor to move forward. Is baby not in a good position? Is mom not well nourished or hydrated, right? Sometimes there's little interventions you can do to help labor along that might decrease risk on that side of things. And then additionally, during pregnancy, usually the third trimester and if you're in a hospital on admission, we're checking your hemoglobin and hematocrit. A little late to usually manage it too much there, but in the third trimester, if you are anemic, treating anemia during pregnancy, anemia is actually a risk factor for postpartum hemorrhage. So we definitely want to be treating that appropriately during pregnancy. And definitely, we've already kind of talked about nutrition quite a bit. Just having good nutrition, taking good care of your physical body is going to help reduce these kinds of risks during labor and birth.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been so good to have you. You have provided us with a ton of really good information, and I know our mamas are really going to appreciate it. I will include in the show notes links to some of the resources that Amy has mentioned in this episode, so that you can go and check them out for yourself. That would include the protein calculator for pregnancy. We mentioned a couple of books, and I think there was another link. So I'll make sure to include all of those in the show notes. Amy, thank you so much. Y'all, this is such a special treat. Amy is very busy midwife. She's amazing at what she does. And so we really appreciate you carving out some time to answer all of our questions and chat with us.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. This is something different and it's fun. I hope you all enjoyed it. Maybe we can do a part 2 coming up.
Oh, and then for those of you who are in Colorado Springs, Amy occasionally teaches prenatal yoga at ENSO on our Saturday class. The Saturday class is at 9 a.m. So if you would like to chat more with Amy, start coming to that Saturday class and get to know her in person. And there you have it, friends. Another enriching episode of My Body, My Bump, My Baby has come to a close. A heartfelt thank you to our amazing midwife, Amy, for generously sharing her insights and expertise with us today. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with others who might benefit from Amy's wisdom and the empowering discussions we have here on this podcast. Remember, your journey is uniquely yours, and we are honored to be part of it. As you navigate the beautiful adventure of motherhood, always remember your body, your bump, your baby is a symphony of love and strength. If you have more questions or topics that you'd like us to explore in future episodes, reach out to us through social media or our website. Your stories and your experiences matter to us. Until next time, take care of yourself and your growing family. This is Bee signing off from My Body, My Bump, My Baby, wishing you all a journey filled with love, joy, and the magic of new beginnings.